Mississippi 1971 cold case solved. Arrest shocks community 53 years ago. A young woman in the town of Harmons Crossing, Mississippi, vanished from a county road in the first week of August and left behind a geometry notebook on her classroom desk, a nearly full jar of saved coins on her mother's kitchen shelf, and a case that the Claiborne County Sheriff's Department closed before the summer was over. The community of Harmons Crossing had one answer for what happened to Luella Mae Tate in August of 1971. The authorities had a different one. For 53 years, the authorities' answer held, not because it was convincing, but because in Claiborne County in 1971, the answers that held were the ones the right people chose to give. Then, in the early months of 2024, a genealogical database in Jackson matched a DNA profile that had been sitting in a state evidence archive since the year the cotton harvest ran late, and a 22-year-old third-grade teacher drove home on a Sunday evening and never arrived. The man whose name came back was not a stranger. He was not unknown. He had been a county supervisor. He had been a church deacon. He had given a scholarship in his own name every spring to a graduating senior at the high school his own county schools had been forced by federal order to integrate 1 year before Luella Tate disappeared. He had been standing for 53 years in the full light of a community that trusted him completely. But before we get to that arrest, and to the shock that moved through Harmons Crossing in its wake, you need to go back to the summer of 1971. Because to understand what justice means when it arrives 53 years late, you first have to understand who Luella Mae Tate was and what was actually taken from that town on an August evening when the cotton was coming in and the air smelled like red clay and heat. Luella Mae Tate was 22 years old in the summer of 1971 and had been teaching third grade at Jefferson Davis Elementary School for 1 year. Jefferson Davis Elementary had served Harmons Crossing's black community through the era of legal segregation and had, by August of 1971, been incorporated into the newly integrated county school system under the federal desegregation orders that had finally reached Claiborne County in 1970. Luella had been among the first black teachers to receive a county contract under the unified system. She was methodical in the classroom, patient with children who struggled with the material, and known among the parents of her students for sending home small handwritten notes, not report cards, notes, about specific things their children had done well that week. She was the eldest of 6 children. Her father, James Tate, had died of a work injury in 1963 when Luella was 14. Her mother, Ida Bell Tate, had raised the 6 children alone through domestic work for white families on the east side of the county. And Luella's teacher's salary had been, since the first check arrived, the first steady professional income the Tate household had ever known. She was saving money in a glass jar on Ida Bell's kitchen shelf, carefully, deliberately, to buy her mother a proper rocking chair. She was also studying by correspondence course to earn a second teaching certificate in mathematics. On Sunday afternoons, while her younger siblings ran in the yard outside, Luella sat at the kitchen table and worked through geometry proofs in a small green notebook she carried to school and back every day. She was 22 years old, and she had already figured out, with the practical clarity of a woman raised on very little in the American South, that the way forward was incremental, and the increments were everything. In August of 1971, Mississippi was still breathing hard from the preceding decade. The Vietnam draft was pulling young men out of Claiborne County at the rate of names on a board outside the courthouse. The schools had been integrated for 1 year under court order, a development that had produced in Harmons Crossing not the open violence of earlier years, but something that had gone underground, something that lived in the way certain men looked at the new order and did not look away quickly enough. The Black Communities Information Network, the church, the barber shop. The word of mouth that moved faster than the county's white-owned newspaper had been how people kept each other safe for generations. It had its limits. In August of that year, it had not been enough. On Sunday, August 8th, Luella had dinner with her family as she always did. She helped her mother with the dishes and told her younger sister about a mathematics concept she had been studying that week. She left the house at approximately 7:30 that evening and drove toward her apartment in the south part of town in her second-hand 1966 Chevrolet. The green notebook was in her bag, along with her school keys for the week ahead. She never arrived at the apartment. At 8:15 that evening, a man named Deacon Morris, 60 years old, driving home from evening church, passed a dark Chevrolet pulled off the side of County Road 4, approximately 2 miles from the Tate family house. He slowed. He saw the car was empty. He continued on, uncertain, and made a mental note to mention it if the car was still there in the morning. He told his wife that night instead, and she said he should call the sheriff's office, and he thought about calling, and he did not call. Because calling the Claiborne County Sheriff's Office in August of 1971 was not for a black man with information about a black woman on a county road, a reliable avenue of help. By Monday morning, August 9th, Luella had not arrived at school. By Monday afternoon, Ida Bell had called the sheriff's office and the school and 3 neighbors and her sister in Jackson. The Chevrolet was found on County Road 4 at 3:30 p.m. by a county road worker. Luella's bag was on the passenger seat. The green notebook was inside it. Her school keys were in the ignition. She was not there. She was not found anywhere near the car. She was not found at all. The Claiborne County Sheriff's Department assigned a deputy named Carl Reeves to the investigation. Reeves was 29 years old and had been on the force for 3 years. He was, by the accounts of people who worked with him at the time, a man who understood which cases required urgency and which required the appearance of urgency without its substance. The Tate case received the latter. A cursory canvass of County Road 4 was conducted. Ida Bell was interviewed once. Deacon Morris was interviewed once. The car was examined and released. The geometry notebook was returned to the family without being cataloged as evidence. No biological material collected at the scene was submitted to any laboratory for analysis. The case remained technically open and functionally untouched for 4 months, at which point a notation in the file indicated the investigation had been suspended pending new information. No new information was sought. No new information was offered the opportunity to arrive. There was one name that circulated through the black community of Harmon's Crossing in the weeks after Luella's disappearance. Passed through the church network and the barbershop and the quiet conversations on front porches that carried information the official record was not going to carry. It was a name that Ida Bell Tate brought directly to Deputy Reeves in September of 1971. Reeves recorded it in 2 sentences on page 11 of the case file. The name was Robert Earl Stanhope. He was 28 years old, the son of the county's most prominent cotton merchant, and he had been working as an aide in the sheriff's office for the previous year. He had been observed on County Road 4 the evening of August 8th by a witness whose account does not appear in the investigative file. He had made unwanted advances toward Luella twice in the months preceding her disappearance, advances she had described to her sister as frightening, and that she had reported to no official authority because she understood, with the same practical clarity she brought to everything, exactly what reporting them would accomplish. Reeves spoke to Stanhope in the second week of September. The file notation records the conversation as 45 minutes. Stanhope was cooperative. He expressed appropriate concern about his community. No follow-up was conducted. His name did not appear on page 12. Luella May Tate's body was found in a dry creek bed on the eastern edge of the Stanhope family's cotton property in March of 1972 by a farmhand who reported it to the county. The manner of death was recorded as undetermined. The case was reclassified in name as a homicide. In practice, it remained exactly where it had been the afternoon Deputy Reeves wrote 2 sentences on page 11 of a file he had already decided was finished. Robert Earl Stanhope stayed in Harmon's Crossing. In 1979, he was elected to the County Board of Supervisors on a platform of economic development and community unity. He served 4 terms. He became a deacon at First Baptist Church. He joined the county school board, where he served for 14 years and was photographed shaking hands with principals, cutting ribbons at gymnasium dedications, and awarding, each spring at the high school, the Stanhope Family Scholarship, $1,000 given in his family's name to a deserving graduating senior. Ida Bell Tate was still alive when Stanhope was elected. She was still alive when he began his 2nd decade in public life. She died in 1997 at the age of 79, having never heard a single official say her daughter's name in a courtroom. Her youngest child, Marcus Tate, kept a photograph of Luella on the mantelpiece of the family home. He sent a letter to the Mississippi Attorney General's office in 1992 requesting a case review. He received a form letter in response. By 2003, 32 years on, the Tate case existed in the county records as an open homicide with a file number and no active status. Luella's name appeared occasionally in historical accounts of civil rights-era injustice in Claiborne County. A sentence, a footnote, a name in a list of names. Marcus had spoken to 2 documentarians and 1 journalist in that span of years. He had spoken carefully and at length each time. None of it had produced a legal consequence for anyone. By 2015, Robert Earl Stanhope was 72 years old, retired from public office, and living in the house on the edge of Harmon's Crossing that had been his family's for 3 generations. He went to church on Sundays. He attended the spring scholarship ceremony when his health allowed. He had 6 grandchildren whose photographs were on his refrigerator. Every case on this channel is built from weeks of research, reading old files, finding the people who kept speaking names the system buried, and trying to do for the living what the law failed to do for the dead. If that work matters to you, please like and subscribe. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. We read every one. Now let's get back to Luella. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit had been operating a genealogical DNA initiative since 2021. A systematic effort to run biological evidence from unsolved homicides through publicly available genetic ancestry databases using the same process that had resolved dozens of cold cases across the country over the preceding 5 years. The process worked by extracting a DNA profile from crime scene material and uploading it to databases compiled from voluntary genealogy submissions, the same websites where ordinary people trace their family trees, then tracing outward through genetic relatives to identify a common ancestor and work back to a primary suspect. The technique required 2 things: biological material from the original scene and the foresight to have preserved it. In the case of Luella May Tate, a state crime scene technician had arrived independently at County Road 4 in August of 1971, operating separately from the County Sheriff's Department, with higher professional standards than the investigation's own. He had collected biological evidence from the scene, cataloged it according to state protocol, and submitted it to the State Archive in Jackson. That evidence had been sitting in a climate-controlled storage facility for 53 years. It had never been tested. It had never been submitted to any laboratory in connection with the Tate case. It had been there, preserved, through 5 decades of changing administrations and 4 rounds of archive reorganization, waiting for a technology that did not yet exist when it was collected. Detective Amara Wells of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit submitted the archived sample for genealogical analysis in January of 2024. Wells was 47 years old and had worked cold homicides for 11 years. She had pulled the Tate case from the state's backlog in 2022 after reading the original file and the 2 follow-up letters Marcus Tate had sent to state offices. Letters answered with form correspondence and filed without action. Her grandmother had known Luella Tate. Not closely. They had attended the same church in the years before Luella died, but closely enough that Ida Bell's face at the funeral had been something her grandmother described once, the way certain images pass between women and families, as something she had never been able to put down. The genealogical analysis took 6 weeks. On March 4, 2024, the match resolved to a primary suspect with a probability the laboratory's report characterized as conclusive. The name at the center of the genetic profile was Robert Earl Stanhope. Detective Wells drove to Harmon's Crossing the following morning. She drove past the high school on her way through town. The Stanhope Family Scholarship banner from the previous spring ceremony was still hanging above the front entrance. She noted it and drove on. Robert Earl Stanhope was arrested at his home in Harmon's Crossing, Mississippi on April 17, 2024. He was 81 years old. He had been making breakfast when the vehicles pulled into the driveway. He came to the door in his robe. He was told he was under arrest for the murder of Luella Mae Tate. He stopped moving. He said nothing. He was handcuffed with the particular care extended to elderly suspects and was walked to the vehicle and driven out of Harmon's Crossing past the cotton fields his family had worked since before anyone alive could remember. Past the church, past the school, past the entrance where the banner still hung. The community of Harmon's Crossing received the news the way a community receives something it simultaneously cannot believe and has, in some part of itself, always known. Robert Earl Stanhope had generated trust the way certain men do, automatically, structurally, as a feature of position rather than any specific act. His name was on a scholarship. His photograph was in the County Historical Society. His grandchildren played youth baseball. In the white community of Harmon's Crossing, the shock was total and genuine. In the black community, in the churches and the households where Luella's name had been spoken for 53 years while the system maintained its silence, the shock was a different thing entirely. It was the shock of an arrival, of something long owed finally appearing at the door. The Stanhope Family Scholarship was removed from the school program within 6 days of the arrest. The board voted unanimously. The motion passed in 4 minutes. The trial lasted 9 days. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, the 1971 case file documentation of Stanhope's known proximity to County Road 4 on the evening of August 8th. Records placing the Stanhope family property as the location where Luella's remains were found, and testimony from a woman now in her 80s who had provided information to the community's informal network in 1971 and had been waiting across 5 decades for someone official to ask her to say it on the record. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict was unanimous, guilty of murder in the first degree. Robert Earl Stanhope was 82 years old at sentencing. He received a life term. He made no statement. His attorney read a letter of sorrow that Stanhope had neither authored nor signed. He was walked from the courtroom at his own pace, which was slower now than it had been on any August evening in 1971, when the world was still arranged entirely in his favor. Marcus Tate was 70 years old when the verdict was read. He sat in the front row of the gallery and held the photograph of Luella that Ida Bell had kept on the mantelpiece. Taken in 1970, at the end of Luella's first year of teaching, standing in front of her classroom door in a yellow dress with the posture of a young woman who has just understood that she is exactly where she is supposed to be. He did not speak to reporters after. He drove to the cemetery where his mother was buried and sat for a while, and whatever he said to Ida Bell Tate in that time, he said it the way the most important things in a family are always said, quietly, without anyone else present, in the language that belongs only to the people who understand what has been carried, and for how long. Luella May Tate was 75 years old in the year Robert Earl Stanhope was convicted. Or she would have been if County Road 4 had been a different road on a different evening. She never earned her mathematics certificate. She never bought her mother the rocking chair. She never saw what her students became, or what her community became, or what the slow, incomplete, ongoing reckoning with the American South's debts produced across the 50 years she did not live to witness. She was 22 years old. She had a green notebook full of geometry proofs and a jar of coins and plans that were specific and achievable and oriented entirely outward toward the people she loved. The geometry notebook was returned to Marcus Tate by the Claiborne County Sheriff's Department in 2024, along with several personal effects from the 1971 file. He opened it at his kitchen table and read his sister's handwriting on page after page. The careful proofs, the clean measured lines, the working logic of a young woman who understood that the way from one point to another was a matter of patience and precision and the willingness to show every step of your reasoning, because the steps were not incidental to the answer. The steps were how you proved the answer was true. There is a particular kind of courage in what Luella May Tate represented in Harmon's Crossing in the summer of 1971. Not the dramatic courage of marches and confrontations, but the daily, structural courage of being a black woman, building a professional life in a county, still deciding whether to allow it. The correspondence course, the jar of coins, the handwritten notes to parents about their children's small victories. None of these were small things. They were the full weight of what she intended to do with her life. And what Robert Earl Stanhope took from Harmon's Crossing was not only Luella's life. He took 53 years of what she would have been. We ask this of every case we bring you. What does it tell us that Luella's name was spoken in the black community of Harmon's Crossing for 53 years while the official record treated her death as a closed administrative matter, and that the woman who finally brought charges did so because she had read 2 unanswered letters from a brother who never stopped asking? What does it mean that the biological evidence capable of identifying her killer was collected in 1971 by a state technician doing his job carefully, preserved through 5 decades of changing systems, and never once submitted for analysis until a cold case detective pulled the file from a backlog in 2022? And what do you believe justice requires when it arrives for a 22-year-old woman in the year that would have been her 75th? Leave your answers below. We read every one. Justice found Luella May Tate after 53 years. It found her because one state technician did his job precisely in August of 1971, because a brother wrote letters that no one answered but that a detective read anyway, and because a genealogical database returned a name to a woman who drove into Harmon's Crossing and noticed a scholarship banner still hanging above a high school entrance on her way through town. Stories like Luella's are the reason this channel exists. If you believe the truth is worth finding, no matter how many years have been placed between it and the light, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.